We had a great conversation about the fundamentals for Mexico.
You can really see just being on the ground here how dynamic the economy is. And as a result of that, local Mexicans have more purchasing power. I'm very bullish on Mexico as far as its economy. Because Mexico, in my opinion, has more economic tailwinds than any country in the developed world. The government here is making a lot of very smart infrastructure investments, in my opinion. A few weeks ago, I was part of a U.S. Mexico trade mission.
Or
Like I said, I'm very,
having
very bullish on Mexico. But don't get me wrong, they could screw it up.
energy is a big input in growing any economy. Challenges Mexico has always had is access to capital.
My prediction is a decent amount of that capital that was initially allocated for U.S. projects is now going to come to projects in Mexico because there'll be a lot of demand for that.
Seems like the Mexican government is loosening up credit policies.
The capital markets here are definitely relatively shallow compared to the U.S. Based on the size of the economy. So I think the growth of the credit market here is kind of inevitable. If you have a good product, that a product or service that you can bring to market here that either one isn't here yet or there's very limited competition, you're going to do really well, I think, but kind of by default. Well, you mentioned fintech. I think that's really important here because
Welcome to Financial Liberties in Mexico. And today we're speaking with Nathan Wingham from EnCapital. He works in the capital advisory services out of the US doing commercial real estate and alternative investments. We discuss Mexico's fundamentals, why we're both bullish on the Mexican economy, why we like the regions we live in, and then we get into capital expenditure projects that are happening in Mexico, how they're getting financed. He talks about access to capital markets, and then we also discuss various sectors and industries we really like. So I hope you enjoy the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's get into it. Good day, everyone. My name is Vin Maru from Financial Liberties in Mexico, and today I have a special guest on. His name is Nathan Wingham. And he also lives down here in Mexico, works in the finance space. We had a great conversation last week, and we really wanted to follow up with doing a podcast talking about Mexico in general, why we both like it here, what we see happening in the Mexican economy, as well as where the world of finance is going in Mexico. Now, there's tons of growth opportunities we both see, and Mexico is an emerging market. We both love the fundamentals. So, Nathan, please take a minute, introduce yourself and a bit of your background, then we'll dive right into some topics.
Sure. Yeah. And appreciate being here with you. She said, so now I live in Mexico City full time. I've been here for about coming up on a year, full time. Prior to that, I was half time here and half time in Puerto Rico, and I was in LA for 15 years before that. But most of my career has been in capital advisory work, a lot in commercial real estate, renewable energy, some corporate credit. I also do some advisory work in the space industry. I'm on the board of a publicly traded satellite manufacturer that's out of Hong Kong that's listed there. And I also am a part of a group that puts on regular alternative investment conferences in different locations.
Awesome. I mean, I imagine you're busy just with all that, and now we're in
Right.
Mexico, and we had a great conversation about the fundamentals for Mexico. So let's let's maybe start off with that. Why we both like Mexico. I mean, I can give you my perspective. I moved to Mexico about 4 years ago, and having a background in as a research analyst in the finance space more than anything. I'm not a financial advisor by any means, and but I saw Mexico as a ripe opportunity when I moved here. So I started a group called Investors and Entrepreneurs in Mexico on Facebook. It's grown quite a bit. We get a lot of chatter and talk about Mexico economy, finance, banking, all sorts of topics. But just being down here, boots on the ground, you can see where the fundamentals for Mexico line up with the demographics, the population, where we're just going to see this massive. It's no longer even a third world country. I think it hasn't been for a while. It's an emerging market. And I love it because I think I'm seeing opportunities left, right, and center, whether you're a Mexican national or an expat that's looking to come down here, possibly start a business and tap into this emerging market that we see in the growth opportunities. So, I mean, that's why I love it. I don't know if I imagine you have your own views on it. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started spending a lot of time here 9 years ago because I met my wife. I I was just traveling on like a weekend type of trip from LA, met her, and obviously we eventually got married. But I've been coming here for almost a decade and spending a lot of time here. And then, as I mentioned, full time for coming up on a year, and then half time for 3 years prior to that. And so just being here, um, kind of seeing one, how hard Mexicans work is incredibly impressive. And even with an incredibly low unemployment rate, I think the unemployment rate right now is like just under 3%. It has been for some time. But even with that very, very low unemployment rate, the culture here is very, very hardworking, which is something I really appreciate. And then you can really see just being on the ground here how dynamic the economy is and the amount of activity, especially here in Mexico City, which is, one of the largest cities in the entire world. Um, there's a real like feeling um, of again like dynamism and opportunity and kind of hustle culture, kind of all the things you want to see, right? An economy that's very productive. And then we can get into more details on the structure of the economy, the demographics, and all those things that make me feel really bullish on the country. But I didn't come here really with the intention of participating in that economic activity. It was more, we were here half time and then now full time because my wife wanted to be closer to her family. I really like the quality of life here. The affordability is great, especially coming from, say, Southern California. And so that was what kind of led me here. But then just being on the ground and seeing everything that's going on, it's hard not to see opportunity kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you probably have a much different perspective of Mexico than I do, being in the largest city, Mexico City, whereas I'm in Puerto Vallarta, which is kind of a hotbed for expats on the West Coast. But again, it's a beach town, coastal town, a lot of retirees. I don't see as much, let's call it the younger generation. There are some digital nomads here, but for the most part, it's retirees that move here, and some are setting up businesses, which is great to see happen. But you probably have a totally different perspective being in Mexico City and the business and economic activities that are happening there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this metropolis has 23 million people in it. Like I
Yeah,
said, it is one of the biggest cities on earth. And it is here is kind of the opposite of how you describe Vallarta. It's very young. I mean, the overall population in Mexico in general is quite young. Something like almost half the population is under 30. But here you really see it. And it's a very dense city. As I mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of time previously in my life in Los Angeles. But the metro areas for Mexico City and Southern California are roughly the equivalent in terms of population with 23 million people. But Mexico City is much denser. And it has much better public transportation. I mean, the metro here is 195 stops. You got great bus services and all of that infrastructure that kind of lubricates that economic activity. And so, I mean, you see it, you go walking around down in Reforma, in the middle of the day or something on a weekday. I mean, it's, in Reforma, as people know, it's kind of the central business district. It is full of, guys walking around in suits and bankers and lawyers and kind of all these, very sophisticated, white collar professionals that are there.
awesome. And do you see a huge expat community there?
It's growing. It's growing a lot, actually. It's kind of funny to me because I've been coming here for 9 years, and pre-COVID, it was pretty common that if I mentioned to someone that, hey, I'm going to Mexico City for the weekend to see my girlfriend at the time, they would usually say something like, "Okay, well, don't get kidnapped. Be careful." And after COVID, that really changed because it kind of got more on everyone's radar. And just so everyone knows, I've never had a problem here with any negativity, crime, or anything like that. Zero fear of that here. I actually feel a lot safer here than I ever did in LA or 10 years in Hollywood. Um, but it was around COVID when that changed. And now, you walk around Roma, Condesa, kind of the more kind of popular areas for digital nomads. And I mean, there's more gringos walking around than Mexicans. And, when I tell people now where I live, like on a Zoom or something, now I either get one of two responses. And it's either, oh my God, we were just in Mexico City and it was incredible. Or my friend was just there, and they tell me it's incredible, and I'm planning a trip. And I'm not exaggerating. It's like every other weekend, I'm hosting a friends and friends that are in town I haven't seen for a while. They're checking it out, or a friend of a friend. Someone asked me to show around town, which I'm always happy to do because it's a super fun city.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the digital nomads and the two zones, Rome, I think it is, and Condessa that are there, and huge expat community. But I remember reading an article where I think it was probably a year ago. So Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, was encouraging digital nomads to move to Mexico City. And you've
Mhm.
probably seen this big boom over the last couple of years. But that being said, I heard, I think it was about a month or so ago, there's a lot of riots and it seemed like there was a bit of a backlash towards, uh, especially in those areas with the rising rents, there's backlash towards these gringos and digital nomads that have been just causing major inflation and pushing out nationals out of the city pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll respond to a few things you said there. One, the big riots that were on the news that were all over every news circuit. The night that supposed one of them supposedly happened in Roma, I had dinner in Roma that night. I don't remember seeing anything like that. So my thoughts are it was kind of a small group of guys that were causing trouble, wanted to break some windows. But I don't live in those neighborhoods, so I can't really say for sure. So I just know that night, the one that like the one image that was on every news wire, like some broke guys breaking into a retail store, was like in the same neighborhood. I was there and I didn't see anything. So with that, I mean, yeah, gentrification is definitely occurring in those neighborhoods, but they were occurring well before the digital nomad influx. I mean, that definitely accelerated it, had an impact. But I said I've been coming here for 9 years, and I remember when Condesa was like the first one that was kind of turning. And you know, you say gentrifying, right? Like the rents were going up, people were improving properties and all that, and no one was complaining at that time. They were very happy because those neighborhoods used to have a lot of trouble prior to that, and then Condesa kind of fully gentrified, and then Roma was next, and now I'd say it's pretty well gentrified. And now that's expanding out into other neighborhoods like Escandon and Doctores and things like that. Um, but this really reminds me a lot, actually, of things I saw when I was in Los Angeles, because my primary business is commercial real estate. So I see all these things very clearly. And I remember when very similar neighborhoods like Silver Lake and Echo Park were gentrifying. They went from being, pretty rough from just the many decades of urban decay for a lot of reasons. Started getting new investment, attracting new development, gentrifying, and it was the same thing. It was, you kind of hear the same stories, right? And on one hand, you can certainly sympathize with people that have lived in certain areas for a long time and rents are going up, and let people, unless they own their own real estate, their landlord is probably going to respond to market forces and start pushing their rents up. And that does mean that some people, depending on whatever the level of income is, have to respond to that, and then, which may mean moving to some other neighborhood that's more affordable. And so on one hand, you definitely want to sympathize with people on that front. But on the other hand, I mean, we could have a whole separate long conversation about why uh, things like rent control and other types of, you know, regulations that distort the market forces around real estate are generally pretty negative and actually have a pretty poor effect on long-term affordability in neighborhoods like that. So at the end of the day, it's definitely happening. I can tell you the people there that own real estate, most of which are not foreigners, are quite happy because they're seeing their property values appreciate and their income's going up and all that. And a lot of them have, converted their whatever their real estate is to short-term rentals because the demand is there. So they're, making a lot of income from that. But again, it's, these kinds of transitions, while I think on the long run are generally pretty positive because you improve the quality of life in different neighborhoods, they do have effects.
Yeah, and I've seen it down here in Vallarta. It's funny, they always say wherever the artists and the LGBTQ
Mhm.
community moves, and Vallarta is probably one of the biggest ones in that. That's where the fastest gentrification and rising prices of everything happen. And I've seen a transformation in Vallarta in the 4 years that I've been here. And I see a lot of posts and a lot of people talking about how it's really the gringo markets that are pricing everyone out. And I have to kind of make the argument that it's not really them because you look at the expat community in Mexico in general. The last number I looked, and I mean it's a rough number, let's say, but it's about 1 million people. And a population of 130 million, we're less than 1%. That can't drive all of the prices up everywhere. And then this, and the second thing is, even out of that million, they're just a good portion of them are probably renting. Like, what's realistic portion that actually owned and are buying up properties? It's really the Mexican nationals that are in these hotbed areas and are getting higher rents, and inflation is getting pushed around the world with the US dollar, continually expanding its money supply. That pushes inflation everywhere around the world. And then even
Yeah.
Mexico is inflating their economy. I did a report on the 2026 economic package they're putting out, and they're talking about expanding about 5 or 6% of capital expenditures in Mexico. You've got a rising middle class. So to blame the gringos for all of this, sure, they do affect it, but it's not all of it. I mean, there's just way too many dynamic factors at play here that are pushing up prices in Mexico in general. So,
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. You're right. My understanding is there's about 1 million Americans that live in all of Mexico. That's across, Cabo, Cancun,
sure,
Vallarta, and
absolutely.
of course here. And so you're right. I think the macro impact from that is like pretty minimal. There's a lot of other macro forces that are happening, but when we start talking more about the fundamentals of the economy, I believe that inflation and a lot of the increases. I mean, there are certainly little neighborhoods. Roma Condesa are probably good examples of that, where there is a lot of influx. But as I mentioned, this stuff was happening before there was a lot of gringos heading there, because I was here prior to that. And those neighborhoods were gentrifying on their own. And so I think it's just the economy's growing. It's growing very rapidly. Like you said, the middle class is growing. It's quite big and it's continuing to grow, which is great. That's what you want to see from a productive economy and from for economic stability. And as a result of that, local Mexicans have more purchasing power and more income to spend, and the market is adjusting to that as it would anywhere you have a free market.
And for those that are watching this, I mean, when we talk about the fundamentals and the demographics for the middle class, what we're really talking about is people that are in that age group of, let's say, 18 to 35-ish, who are either starting to enter the workforce or already in that workforce. And the population in that age group is massive in Mexico. So this is what's driving the economy here more than anything. Um,
Yeah, I actually have some data around this. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. Right now, 48.8% of the population is under 30.
yeah.
I mean,
I mean,
that's phenomenal from a long-term economic productivity perspective.
does
That's
that
great.
include 18 and over though, like the working force, or is that children as well?
That's everyone under 30. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So, but if you look at the demographic pyramid of Mexico, which I have in front of me right now, I mean, the biggest bulges in that pyramid by far are the 24, the 15 to 19 and the 20 to 24 bracket.
sure. Well, any of the charts you're talking about, if you can send them over, I'll include
Yeah,
them as
absolutely.
images in the video here.
Mhm.
Um,
Sure.
but I think we've done a pretty good overview of Mexico and why we like it. So really, this podcast is focused on the economy, investing, making money down here, whether it's entrepreneurship. So how about we just dive into some of those topics? Like we could go
Sure.
top down
Absolutely.
and kind of look at kind of the broader economy and what's happening. Now, I've did an interview with Bernardo Gonzalez. He's a regional director of Actinver. And in the last interview I did, which is about a month ago, we were talking about the fundamentals for the economic growth, but foreign capital investment that's coming into Mexico, Mexico looking at diversifying out of just the biggest trading partner with the US, but
Mhm.
also looking at other nations now as major trading partners. Manufacturing shift that's going nearshoring, they call it. So um, that's another major driver. Uh, I've seen over the last few years just continuous growth in all of these. And
Mhm.
I suspect once we get past this tariffs talk and and the USMCA negotiation for next year, I think Mexico is going to start firing on all cylinders more than probably it has been in the last year.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I'm very bullish on Mexico as far as its economy. I think Mexico, I think, I think 20 or 30 years ago, if you were a kid out of business school, the smartest thing you could have done was probably learn Mandarin and move to Shanghai, something like that. And you'd be riding that wave of the rise of China. That story's over. China's, I mean, that's a whole other podcast, right? But they got a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Um, I think today, if you're that kid right out of business school, where do you go? I think you come here, learn Spanish. And I mean that. Because Mexico, in my opinion, has more economic tailwinds than any country in the developed world. You said that, from the population structure is the best in the developed world. You'll get 20 to 30 years of productivity out of that population. You've got this rising middle class, like we mentioned. Um, the level of education in Mexico is rising. Mexico has a super high literacy rate. But on top of that, Mexico is making, the government here is making a lot of very smart infrastructure investments, in my opinion, um, that I think are going to pay dividends for a very long time. There's a bunch of them, but a good example of one is I think it's the Interoceanic train in
Now,
Tehuantepec in Oaxaca, which is the isthmus, the smallest part of Mexico between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And the government started a project several years ago to rehabilitate an old railroad track that connected the ports on either side. And that rehabilitation is done. Now they're in the second phase, which is upgraded the port capacity on both sides. But as soon as that thing's up, like fully rehabbed and ready for commercial operations, that is a direct competitor to the Panama Canal. And I think a very significant chunk of the traffic that currently goes through the canal today is going to shift and go there for a bunch of reasons. But the primary ones is it is much faster, um, much cheaper to basically have a boat come on one side, unload it, put all your cargo on the train it across. I think it takes 8 hours, put it back in another boat, and send it on its way. Because right now, just the wait time to get through the Panama Canal for a cargo ship is something like 20, 30 days. I mean, you literally have to sit outside the canal for 3 to 4 weeks, burning fuel, paying your crews, and all that before you can even go through the canal. And then you have to pay all your millions of dollars of canal fees and all that. And so, and the canals, most people think it's one long canal. It's actually several large lakes in the middle of the country that are connected by smaller connecting canals with locks. And the problem is those lakes, the water level keeps dropping for whatever reason. And it doesn't look like it's ever going to improve. And so the amount of ships that can go through at one time gets less every year. And so that's why everything slows down. And so, again, that train to Tehuantepec, just one example. I was actually a few weeks ago, I was part of a US Mexico trade mission that was here. It was 100 plus very high level business folks from the US here for a week of meetings with various agencies from the federal government and a bunch of different states in Mexico, um, which is a fantastic experience because the government here presented a lot of data around everything that we're talking about. But really the biggest takeaways were one, just how totally integrated the U.S. and Mexican economies are, and how supportive the Mexican government is of that trade relationship and working very, very hard to continue to expand it.
yeah, and that's I agree. I mean, it's going to take a bite out of the Panama Canal, and it'll reduce time for and cost for it. And now Mexico being, I would say, literally the one of the largest manufacturing hubs in the Western world,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's taking a bite out of China. Um, it's, I just, I can't see a scenario where this economy fails unless you get into super socialistic policies by the government. And, if they let the free
yeah.
market reign, then it's just gonna flourish. And
Oh, like
or
I
Trump
said, I'm very,
having,
very bullish on Mexico. But don't get me wrong, they could screw it up.
oh, for
Like,
sure.
they can totally shit the bed on this. I don't necessarily think they're going to. Like I said, I think they're making smart infrastructure investments in education, many other things, which is they're kind of doing all the stuff want to see a country that's at this level of development be doing to promote future economic development. So I see a lot of positive things. But you're totally right. I mean, they could get a whack job president in here who just something happens and flips the economy on its head, and it can happen. I mean, if you look at Venezuela in like the 1970s and 80s, it was very, very prosperous and very capitalistic, and now it is very much not that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And mind you, I am hearing a lot of talk out of the government here about nationalizing certain resources. It's not all of them. The
so
most
there are,
recent
but at the same
is
time, they're
water.
also privatizing. So there's a lot of there's you're right. There's some nationalization conversations, but there's also parallel conversations going on about taking certain industries or certain utilities, different things, and privatizing them.
Yeah.
So
I would almost think they should just privatize Primex. I mean, it's just, they can but what I do find is, and energy is a big input in growing any economy. And what I find happening in Mexico, I mean, yeah, they extract a lot of oil. It's been dwindling over the years, so they're not as big as they used to be. But the problem is that they have to take that oil into Texas, get it refined, and then ship it back. There just needs to be refining capacity here built. And LNG plants is another one because I'm really bullish on that gas in general. So as long, if they start doing infrastructure on that side of it, then you're going to get Mexico to become a lot more energy independent. Now they're
so
pushing
they're doing
for
it.
solar.
So what that trade mission, that was one of the things that they really were showcasing to the group.
Okay.
Is there's refinery development in process. There's several LNG facilities around the country that are being developed, and they're also moving. They're getting ready to do a big push into renewables. So they are very keen on that. And I mean, Claudia Scheinbaum has a PhD in energy engineering, I think from Berkeley.
Yeah.
Um, so that she gets it for sure. And that, if there's one person you want at the helm around the energy conversation, it's that person. And so I think like many of the other infrastructure investments, again, we just saw this a few weeks ago, and they were very, open about what they're working on. There's a lot of stuff in the work. So another reason I'm very bullish.
Let me ask you, I mean, you're at these negotiations, you heard about the energy infrastructure. Are you getting involved in any of the capital financing on those projects since you have this background in it?
So not yet, but I'm in conversations. So yeah, I mean, I actually used to be a solar developer 15 years ago. And I see a lot of energy deals, the advisory work I do in the US and also in parts of the Caribbean. So the short answer is not yet, but probably likely pretty shortly down the path because I'm starting to see some projects that are starting to look for financing, especially on the renewable side.
Well, it's
And I'll add one thing to that, which is specifically for renewables, for solar and wind, because the US under the BBB is now phasing out the investment tax credits at the federal level for solar and wind. Um, there's a ton of money that was, there's some very large private equity funds, and that's entirely their business is financing those types of projects. And now that those projects in the US are going to be less economically attractive, my prediction is a decent amount of that capital that was initially allocated for US projects is now going to come to projects in Mexico because there'll be a lot of demand for that.
awesome. And especially if the tariff talks finish off quickly and it's amicable by both sides and the new USMCA trade negotiations go. That's why I can see a ton of capital flowing into Mexico once we've got the green light on all of that. So, speaking of capital markets, one of the challenges Mexico has always had is access to capital. So a friend of mine knows the president and CEO of the Mexican Stock Exchange. Now they're actually taking uh, a lot of companies here and dual listing them. So they're publicly traded companies here in Mexico, and they're getting listed in the US. And even I cover a lot of topics on investing in, what's just investing down here. And the brokers here have access to buy US stocks. That a lot of them, and most of them are available for investing here. And I've looked at the Mexican Stock Exchange in itself. But obviously, if you're going to grow industries and that they need access to cheaper cost of capital. and access to capital. So some of
Mhm.
these companies that are even,
Mhm.
10, 20, 30, $50 million equivalent US revenue generating companies, they're having a challenge of even raising capital down here. So
Mhm.
I suspect that that is going to change because it seems like the Mexican government is loosening up credit policies and they're going to expand that. So I'm hearing all these new fintech banks that I love and all this
Mhm.
stuff. The small to medium sized enterprise industry is gonna get much easier for access to capital. But these major infrastructure, these major companies that need the 20, $30 million, $50 million to start expanding and then maybe go public. Um, I'm hoping that changes for them. I mean, I'm kind of bright on looking forward to that. But I mean, you come from that world, so do you have any insights into what's happening in the Mexican market in terms of access to capital?
Yeah, so I do. And the capital markets here are definitely relatively shallow compared to the US, based on the size of the economy. But they're developing. And so, we're kind of seeing the growth of the alternative investment industry here, which, really covers everything that's not just a publicly traded security. So that includes all of your debt funds, your private credit funds. I know several private credit funds, that are here that are actively, providing loans and deploying capital. But it's a challenge. I mean, even in the commercial real estate space, access to, you're kind of like cookie cutter bank construction, loans that's all over the US is actually pretty hard to find here. Um, but it is growing. I do think that in credit is what lubricates economic activity.
Sure.
And so as the economy here, grows, in your typical like developed economy, I don't know the exact number, but it's something like I think 70 or 80% of like all economic activity in some form or fashion, navigates through some type of credit structure or credit vehicle. And so just the demanding growth or the demand for credit that economic growth over time it will produce, I think it is going to, as a result of that, you're going to see more capital move into the market and kind of more credit providers kind of take what right now are kind of common credit structures in the US and start deploying them here. Um, so you're going to see a lot of growth. I actually think that's a phenomenal opportunity. That's another great wave to ride, right? Is that I think the growth of the credit market here is kind of inevitable. And so there's great ways you could participate that if you're in that space and you're going to get yields here on deployed capital on a similar, for the same type of risk profile that as a deal you might look at in the US, you're going to command a much higher yield here because right now the competition is pretty scarce.
Yeah, I mean, I would suspect you could easily get 4 to 5% higher yield here than you would
Yeah,
back in
that's exactly what
Canada.
I would expect. Yeah, 400 to 500
And
bips is probably what you see. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's all going to change because I just keep hearing more and more things about access to capital and that. Now, you obviously focus on the bigger projects and the bigger dollar amounts. Uh, and for myself, I really like that small to medium-sized enterprise space where they may need access to like, let's say $500,000 to a couple $1 million. It's a very underserved market, and which is why I kind of started diving in and looking at that and um, offering business brokeraging service in that size, the let's call it under the $10 million market cap for a company.
Right.
Uh, there's several that I'm talking to right now that are looking for funding, but they also have an exit plan to sell out at some point. So I could see a scenario where you're going to start to see US companies that are established in a certain vertical niche and want to enter into the Mexican market. They'll start looking at these $5, $10 million capital valuations, pump in more millions, and then grow the business like you wouldn't believe. And that's kind of the business brokerage side that I'm excited about. Now, obviously, I'd love to get into some of the bigger dollar amounts of stuff like you do, but that's kind of a world where I had tapped into a couple of years ago, brought some deals for US deals, but funding it here in Mexico wasn't really an option, so I just didn't pursue it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you're playing in a great space because, like you said, it's relatively underserved, right? And it's the good. I mean, every day I see something here that some opportunity to say, oh wow, this isn't developed yet in Mexico, but it's very developed in say the U.S. or Europe. And so I think there's so many opportunities to just take a strategy, and it could be in finance investment or many other operating businesses, and just translate into Spanish, bring it to Mexico, operate, under the same SOP, and you're going to do very well. Like I said, you have a growing middle class that is hungry for consumption at all levels. And so, if you have a good product, that a product or service that you can bring to market here that either one isn't here yet or there's very limited competition, you're going to do really well, I think, but kind of by default, just because, once people here kind of see whatever those again products or service are that they're not used to, usually they gravitate toward it pretty quickly because they recognize there's a lot of value because it just hasn't been here yet.
Yeah, and one of the topics of interest is fintech for me. I love the space, and I'm starting to see a lot of fintech companies get set up here, raising great amounts of capital, whether it's 20 million or 100 or 150 million. There's a lot of venture capital that's entering that space here, but we only got a minute or two left. So, I think we covered a lot of great topics here, talking about the fundamentals for Mexico, the infrastructure spending, whether it's the port or the energy infrastructure that's required to drive this economy, and then the credit markets. Uh, is there anything you want to really touch on for a minute before we kind of wrap up?
Well, you mentioned fintech. I think that's really important here because one thing we didn't mention about the economy, Mexico, officially, Mexico has I think the 13th largest GDP in the world, something like that. But something like half of all economic activity here is not reported because it's cash, it's the guy selling tacos on the corner kind of thing. Um, so if you factor that in, it's quite possible that Mexico's economy is like double what's officially reported, which would make it, I think, like the sixth or seventh largest economy in the world. And if you have that much economic activity that runs through no payment rails, no banking system, no nothing, this is where fintech is a huge opportunity, right? Because bringing in kind of new systems of commerce that don't navigate in kind of a traditional banking world to service that part of the economy that's just not utilizing it, that is a monster opportunity. And because of that, fintech development here is a pretty, there is a lot of activity here.
Yeah, I think that's great. We both agree on it. I think we're both on the same page. Excited to see if we can collaborate on certain things. Um, One of the other things I've covered before is RESICO status. So if you're self-employed in Mexico, you can earn up to $180,000 here and pay only 1 to 2.5%. So I would say anyone who's entrepreneurial wants to dive into the Mexican market, apply for your residency, get your tax IDs here, apply for the RESICO status, and you can earn up to 180, $190,000 at this ridiculously low tax rate. So
Yeah,
um, I thank you for coming on, and hopefully we'll carry on this conversation about Mexico in the future again. I'd love to chat with you as things evolve on your end and what you're seeing, and if we can collaborate, by all means, I'd love to do that.
absolutely. Look forward to that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this video with Nathan. We discussed a lot of different topics on why we're bullish on the Mexican economy, starting with the fundamentals, how infrastructure capital spending is coming into Mexico, access to capital markets. And these are the main drivers that are going to help grow Mexico's economy over the coming decades. If you did like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.